says the generalizations and the foundations of the Torah, the written Torah. Moshe, our teacher, taught his Torah that he received a word of mouth to the 70 elders, that's the 70 top scholars of his generation. And in the end of his days, he handed over the entire responsibility of doing so to Yeshua, his top student. And Yeshua handed over to the great sages of his generation. And after him, they learned and they handed over by word of mouth each of the sages of every generation, the outstanding sages from generation after generation, until they came to the generation of Rabbi. And he saw that the Jews were being exiled and they were being scattered among all the nations of the world. And he was worried that perhaps, God forbid, the Torah Shabbat, the oral. So he stood up with the help of the sages of his generation, and he set up the Sefer of the Mishnah that we have today, including it the most important of the foundations of the Torah Shabbat, the oral Torah, in order that it should be available for every Jew. And he was the first from the days of Moshe Rabbeinu to make such a collection available for all Jews to learn the Torah Shabbat. But the mission that he had set up was also needed clarification. It was very cryptic, and it had generalizations and important concepts, but it needed more specifics. And so therefore, there had to be an additional explanations written around that time, utilizing the 13 principles of how we interpret the Torah. The various things you learn Rabbi Yishmael, you learn it when you daven just before Piskin Zimra, and this thing. And therefore, the complete Torah Shabbat Peh was not yet completely available to the ordinary Jew. It was only to the great scholars. Therefore, the sages of that generation, after Rabbeinu HaKodesh, they had to go and make additional to retain this knowledge. And among this is Sifra and Sifri, Tosefta, and Mechil. That all this, the intent for all these were to further clarify the important aspects of the Mishnah, of the Torah Shabbat Peh. And then we have eruditions of their works. The Talmud, the Babylonian Talmud and the Jerusalem Talmud. First the Jerusalem Talmud appeared in Eretz Yisrael, and then the Babylonian Talmud appeared thereafter, explaining the reasonings of the Mishnahs until everybody could understand, all the way sages of every generation could understand it, until the closing up of the Talmud. The Yerushalmi was closed up about 350 of the Common Era, Talmud Bavli about 550 of the Common Era. And there it contained the entire Torah Shabbat Peh, the entire oral Torah. All the clarifications and the explanations of the Mishnah, and completely, after that time, they had to go and clarify it. So they would, and he says, this is what the Torah Shabbat Peh consists of. And of course, we've had Arayom, the present day, great empires, starting with the Rosh Yeshivas in Babylon, and after them the Rishonim, and after them the Achronim, the period we're in now, that are constantly trying to make rules of decide questions based on the Talmudic literature. So he says like this. He says that these Torahs were twins. They were both given by God. And they are both necessary to be learned together in order to understand anything about one or the other. He said, by all scholars of all the generations, it was not set up in any particular fashion that you could take a posik and understand what the oral tradition is on it. If you want to discuss any posik, you have to go through an entire. It requires a tremendous amount of learning to get to that capacity that you can go through Gan Shas all the Gemaras, and tried to learn out all the various subject matters that are concerning with any particular rule of Allah. As a result, even when we have commentaries, let's say, for instance, he even mentions the commentary of Rashi, which is, of course, by us is Kochi Kedoshim, Holy of Holies. Everybody that learns Gemara realizes that Rashi is par excellence in the capacity of explaining its explanation. Rashi can only explain it according to one of many could possibly be the explanation. Therefore, we have other authorities also explaining it. And it would be foolhardy for anybody to assume that the entire understanding of how to decide a question by just following one opinion all the way through. This is what the article that Rabbi Dr. A. Turk in his Codes of Responsa, an article he wrote that was printed in the Jewish press on Friday, January the 10th, 1986, that I had quoted from you. You recall that I had quoted in the earlier shir that the Rambam wanted to make a code of the Talmudic law so that it become understandable to the masses, that explains it. And then Rabbi Abraham, the slave, was a great Rabbi, argued with him and said that this simplifies it. He thinks that he makes it there because in truth he didn't go and quote his sources, and anyway his work would be inadequate to decide a question of how to continue quoting Rabbi Samuel A. Turk. He says like this: one does not necessarily come to definitive decision of the law from the Talmudic source. Codes arrive at different and decisions from the same Talmudic source. When you learn in the Shulchan Aruch, you'll find greaties, each one a giant in capacity of understanding the Torah. It's mind-boggling. Codes of law written completely are not comprehensive enough to cover all the possible varying situations. Their formulations are meant for the average case, but where is the case ever?
Where is the average case?
Yes. Furthermore, the codified opinion, sometimes that's not available. That's not really appropriate. Knows the law for the exceptional and unusual cases and can render a proper ruling. I called that to your attention last time. Knowing the leading opinion by studying the source, one may sometimes rule in accordance with it in exceptional or unusual situations. As I quote you quite time, I get Baruch Hashem Shilas that's called on me all the time, and I have to remember what the Gemara says on it, and when I ask me a Shilah, because it's not the usual case. It's an extraordinary case. And I've yet to come across a usual case.
How to find an average case?
It's just like an average person. There's statistically there, but it really doesn't exist. These are some of the reasons why not all scholars are enthusiastic about Maimon, even though they recognize some of its benefits and admire the stupendous effort and genius it represented. Also, the great rabbis were very much afraid that the codes would reduce the study of the Talmud, which they felt would be a step in the wrong direction. After all, the Talmud is a source for all this codification. If you want to get something easy, people always want to know something easier. Bottom line, easy. So the publication actually defeated its purpose. The code gave rise to numerous commentaries which sought to eliminate the Rabbi's criticisms. Some of the commentaries sources from which the Maimonides drew his conclusion. Others sought to defend his conclusion from the attacks which were leveled against them. Thus, it sometimes would be a shorter process to put source in this or all of the commentaries on the Maimonides code. Some of the same critique against Maimonides code is valid in regards to the Shulchan Aruch was later set up in the beginning by Rabbi Yaakov ben Rabbeinu Hosher. It's called the Balaturim, and he quoted many sources in his things, so therefore we accept him more times than we talk to the Rambam. But even there are differences and now he goes on, Rabbi Turk goes on to complete his article and say like this. This here, which was written in the 1500s already. This was based on the Balaturim, was written in the 1300s. In the 1500s, wrote this. In the final analysis, no code can supplant the study and knowledge of the Talmud. The fact that thousands of responses are being written in our day is sufficient testimony that there are questions that are not clearly covered by any existing code. Code suffices for general rules, the general case. They may be compared to a medical handbook which describes various maladies and their cures. Nevertheless, no one would treat a serious illness from a medical handbook. He would seek treatment from a highly competent doctor who would know that particular malady personally and then treat it. So also, one should not make a decision of Jewish law from knowledge of only the code. To write a responsive means a tshuva, one must have a good knowledge of circumstances surrounding a particular situation, as well as a firm grasp. The law is not a straitjacket. There's a certain amount of flexibility in it. A competent scholar of the Torah is aware of all the possibilities. That's the end of his article. To understand, we have this. I want to give you why it is so difficult to understand the written law just reading it. Could you bring some chumash?
Explained it out.
No, he explained it to all. He explained it first to his father and then to the elders.
All right. No, but let's say to the elders, right there, the 70 elders.
No,
I explained to both of them. At that time, wasn't it clear-cut the halacha?
Moshe Rabbeinu was capable of this.
In other words, there was one answer to the.
Even Moshe Rabbeinu from time to time had to go to God and ask him what the halacha was.
All right. So then he got the explanation and explained it to the elders, the answer to that particular problem.
But problems have a way of cropping up that are not necessarily fully decided by a prior decision.
That's all you need is a variation.
And it may have a different application.
So you'll never get an explanation.
That's right.
Because there's always new things coming out
That's
scientifically.
right. No matterness of understanding of things that comes. You become more aware of certain problems that may happen.
Who's not a rabbi? Can he go and look up a place for his own day-to-day life?
It's very difficult because
What does a person do in that situation?
you have to ask a rabbi.
So why do they have all these codes? I mean,
For the average case, they make a legitimate question.
Wait, where it says this, so this is what I'll do.
Yeah, I know, but Mishnah Berurah is not necessarily the halacha all the time.
What are you going to do? Let me finish my question. Let's assume that, let's say in 10 years, they'll colonize the moon. Let's just assume that. Which is the possibility? Now, they're going to have a problem. Let's say people are going to live on the moon.
Yeah.
When to daven, when not to
Yeah.
daven. I mean, there's going to be a time element.
No.
Now, how are they going to get the explanation that
We have responses being written every day. We have that are concentrating on modern problems, medical problems, space problems that we have at the present day.
their decision collectively will be the halacha?
That will be, yes. But we always go to Talmudic. We have, if you will, as I said, we get to the Madriga. I'll learn you to the Shulchan Aruch in the original. And you'll see that there are giants saying one thing and giants saying one. Sugar trying to figure out how you should paskin halacha.
Is it like Turk is wrong?
It's possible, yes, but I doubt very much if he is because I happen to believe that what he says is basically correct.
What if wait a second, you didn't know yourself again. I'm just talking about a kid, sir. We used to look in that, used to find out what to do in certain situations. Now, if somebody looks in the Mishnah Berurah, okay, usually the halacha is more times than not. It's like him.
I had a situation where one of my Talmudim, I'm not mentioning the name, asked Shaila, and my Talmud asked him, isn't there any other opinion? He says, no, this is the opinion you have to follow. He came to me and he told me the situation. So I sat down with my Talmud and I learned with him 7 other opinions that contradict that one opinion that was quoted by the Rav. And the majority opinion is not like it was possible.
Tom misunderstood his man. I just have that feeling that he misunderstood.
No, he asked him specifically because he had learned from me for many years, and he realized that there's no one answer to anything. Yes, Maleo, you were asking a question. All right.
And he needs to find out. He needs to
On the phone, you can't reach it there. You have to follow through yourself.
time on what the Mishnah Berurah is. You know, the Mishnah
But
Berurah.
that's only until you can reach oppose it, because
You know, Mishnah Berurah has, in his introduction to the Mishnah Berurah,
Can't cover all variations.
Mishnah Berurah says that if one tries to learn just from the Shulchan Aruch, and he tries to find this is the halach, Yosef himself in the Torah for many different
That's
possible
right.
cases.
right.
Therefore, he says he wrote the Mishnah Berurah for this reason, so that it would be a Mishnah that's Berurah, that's clear, that you can see and that this is the halach.
Quote the Vilna Gaon. Gaon said like this. Vilna Gaon said in his time, which was 200 years ago, he says, we've had so many responses written on shilas since the last major Shulchan Aruch was set up. We should have new commentaries written on this. And there came out of that, because of that, two big ones that we know about, that we usually discuss, the Mishnah Berurah and Aruch. But we have others that are coming up along all the time, Baruch Hashem. I said that's not necessarily the halach of Bismanenu.
Is it more times than none, the halach? Usually, if we samach
But the Mishnah Berurah passed away in 1933, that's now 1986. We have other, according to the needs of our
No,
generation.
but there's so many things. Moshe Feinstein comes out with a sefer, we don't know what that is anyway.
Baruch Hashem is not the only Gadol. We have others, Baruch Hashem, and this is Baruch Hashem.
Probably want to ask a question is this: when you want to know the order of God, when you want to, what can you then go to?
The ordinary case, you would look, and you would look up there, you look up, and that would give you a rule of thumb that you could use it.
What do I do in this case? I can't do what they say. What do I do? Then you go to a rabbi. You say, look, I never do what.
Not only that, a lot of times you have a child that personally concerns you,
And you can't-
and you might be very prejudiced, and you might not be able to, may not be able to be enough objective,
You're not
maybe more subjective to it, to poskin it. I remember, even after I got smicha, I had a shayla that concerned me personally, and I didn't want to go and poskin the shayla, not because I couldn't look it up, it's just that I was fearful that I would be prejudiced, so I insisted that my Rabbi poskin the shayla for me, because I would not take it upon myself to paskin it at that time. But I wasn't that altogether certain. I would not allow my personal feelings get in the way of my judgment. It's not easy. No. Yes.
Give us a remedy for all.
Again, the quote again. I'm quoting Rabbi Chaim Zimmerman, and in one of his forums, he's written. He quotes the Mishnah, the Vilna Gaon, says that you can find everything in the Torah. Of course, you have to know how to learn it to find it. Like the Mishnah, the Mishnah.
The question that Joe asked about in the future.
In the future, there'll be no shilas. We will have shilas and we'll have chuvas. We'll learn Torah if we'll always constantly be learning and understanding and trying to understand new fact situations that develop.
Okay, like his question, where would you,
Oh, you'll be amazed what's found in the Talmud.
to try to figure out what to do with?
Would it surprise you to find in the Talmud a reference to that the earth is round? That's
Also, it talks
It's
about
nothing is done. All right, but whatever it is. But now, pay attention now to page 136.
Can you give me that?
Perik Yud Zayin, Shoftim
36?
136.
Yes.
Will you read the
Yes. Key?
Could you give us a quick translation of it? I won't hold you to it.
Okay.
Okay, fine. Yes, you can. Very good. That's not very good. I don't say that's something terrible. I think it's something laudatory and should be emulated by others. Now, I'm going to read to you Rabbeinu Yonam, who was an explanation of the first Mishnah in Pirkei Avos, a portion of it. Unfortunately, we only have 2 copies of it. So you correct me, Moshe, or help me in case I stumble. In Pirkei Avos says, Moshe Kibul Torah Sinai. Moshe received the Torah from Sinai. Yeshua handed over to Yeshua. Yeshua gave me, handed over to the elders, and the elders handed over to the men, to the prophets, Nevi'im Misoru Anshik Nesmedola, and the prophets handed over to the men of the great assembly. Hemamru Shloshel Urim, they would say three things that they emphasize. Adin, be deliberate in judgment. Va'amidu Samedim Abei, and stand up as many students as you can with her and make offense to the Torah. Now, in relation to the phraseology, Moshe Kibul Torah Misinai. This is what the Rabbeinu Yonah says. The Rabbeinu Yonah lived about 700 years ago. He was one of the last Rishonim, and he was a tremendous scholar. He wrote Sharadli. In the first phraseology, states like this in relation to the phraseology. He says like this: what did he receive? Bein Torah Shabbat. Moshe received the Torah that was written, Bein Torah Shabbat, also the Torah that was oral. Torah the Torah was given with its explanation. This is the Rishon talking, Rabbeinu Yonah. If this was not so, that we were explaining the meaning of the written Torah, it actually would be impossible to understand it at all. It's very close up. It's written, Lo Tigzo. One of the Ten Commandments, you shouldn't steal. In the Lo Tigzo, the Ten Commandments, it's talking about don't steal a person and sell him at the store. Tigno, sorry. Lo Tigzo, don't declare also, and all laws of damages is under that one general negative commandment. You have to look.
That would be like the Ten Commandments?
It's possible. No, Sadyagon. Rabbi Sadyagon. Sadyagon learned off in the Ten Commandments, all 13 Chumash. Yes?
Where is that?
Here it is.
The actual tablets.
They were just before the destruction of the temple. They were hidden. No, but the Jews have always, before a big calamity, they would hide these sacred vessels, and many of them were hidden. Many of them were taken away by the Goyim. I have a lot of things, but let's get back to the subject matter at hand. Life of miracles. All right. So, with this thing, you have all this. So, if you just say don't steal, what are the ramifications? What are the specifics of don't steal or don't rob? And there you have to study many blocks of Gemara and Midrashim and other sources to find out all the specifics of it. They ain't not Torah. This is also a part of God's law. It was received by, so you can't say that you just say don't steal and then don't specify what it is. How would you know what it encompasses? And further, even though it was actually written down at that time. For someone also it's written, what kind are you talking about? Then din between judgment and judgment. Does that tell you what you're talking about? Then between some kind of skin disease and another kind. Does it tell you what you're talking about? You just said a phrase. You know what it's talking about? You have no intelligence whatsoever. First, the kama mara dumim. There are many kinds of colors of blood. And if a woman finds a spot, whether or not it is considered blood or is it considered something pure, it's some kind of excretion that comes from her that's not a blood. I don't know. Kamadina, many loving, they change around.
What do you mean by that?
Sometimes, at one time frame, this is the halacha, and then if you just move it a little bit, it changes. This is not the halacha. You have the many of these kind of examples where up to a certain point, this would be considered not kosher, and then after a certain point, it's kosher, or vice versa. At a certain point, it's kosher, or the different types of the formations of the lungs and everything like that. All right. Maras and the goyim and the various colors of the skin diseases that were given to make a decision whether a certain person had a certain skin disease that could be taken away or would be permanent, or whether he's tummy or tor, he's unclean, or kama, how you doing, as they know, many things that we know, al-pi Kabbalah, only the Kabbalah through the oral, do we know these things. Halacha mesh misina. We know him with First, you wouldn't know which way to go. For instance, we have portion, they're not explained. Kilo Mikru, it wasn't given originally to be written. Haluchas Evan or Torah Mitzvah, I give to you the tablet, Torah Shabbat. Again, he's quoting the same thing that the quotes, and also which the Gemara and the Brachas also quotes. There's many sources for the same subject matter. Mitzvah zu Torah Nimtzis Omar. So we see from here, Kol mitzvos shenitnu Moshe b'Sinai. All the commandments that were given to Moshe at Sinai, they were given with its explanations. Now, and what was written called the Torah, Perush, and the explanation, Hu Amikra Torah Shabbat, it's called the oral Torah. And Moshe learned es hakol mitia agvuro, and Moshe learned everything from the mouth of God, the Almighty One, and Moshe Yeshua and all the others, and over there. So we have this sequence of events. And we have a few other examples here. In the Borim, it says like this, Perik Yud Beis, in the Borim follow. Where else would you learn? So naturally, what else would it go to something you're talking about Shkita?
Have you made Yismachtem, or is that someplace else?
125, Chafal, Perik chapter, Pasuk Yud.
Ki yirchak min hamakom asher yikar kol asun shmo zvach mid korcho ומצונך אשר עשן עיני בך כאשר ישרך בכל אבס נפשך.
All right, can anybody translate it?
Okay, when the place is far from you, that the Lord your God chooses to place His name, and you should to you, as He has commanded you, and you should eat in your gates with all the.
Last one, you should slaughter. Is a Torah from your cattle and from your sheep, and the Lord your God gave to you as He commanded. You look through the entire Torah.
You can't tell us anything about Shkita.
It doesn't say a word about Shkita.
No, there's no
Not a
Shkita.
word.
There's no Shkita.
It just says Zvicha, slaughter, but doesn't give the specifics. So look at Rashi. First, a top line on page 127. Lamadnu, first column. There are commandments in relation to slaughtering, called how a person should slaughter. And these are it was told about, unless you knew what the halach, you couldn't possibly understand what to do and what to avoid and how to do it. How could a person be a sheikh? How can you have kosher for shechita without anybody knowing it? You learn the Gemara. You learn the Gemara, Uman, Tes, Aman Aleph. You'll see, it says any sheikh that doesn't know the law of Shkita, there are 5 mismotions that can happen in Shkita. The Shia that's causing, Shia Dras Chalada is hidden, Brahma is slanting out from the area that's permitted to be slaughtered on the animal and Iker is tearing rather than cutting.
What do you mean by tearing?
If you have a pagima, a nick in the underneath, Avram is slanting off from the area, Iker is tearing. If you have, you ask about what tearing, it will be tearing rather than cutting. And that's why a pagima, Aser is tearing rather than, it's brought up in Yeridea, the section called Yeridea, in Siman Chaf Gimel, in the 23rd chapter, in Sif Aleph, in the first paragraph, he quotes verbatim this. So you know, he quotes verbatim, and this is the way you have to understand everything.